we are in this second day of conversations of the 65th year conference of World Academy of Art and Science. And World Academy of Art and Science, I think, goes through an amazing time right now of it has been created 65 years ago, as you know, in response to some of the most pressing risks that society has been experiencing then, such as the need to deal with nuclear warfare and challenges of the Cold War. And now we are going through a massive transition related to artificial intelligence, redefinition of the world order, and let's say a lot of critical changes that undermine what we are used to in the last 65 or 70 years of our lifetime, but also for finding new pathways. And I think this conference is one of those spaces we can really fundamentally discuss what it requires right now to make this shift, this adaptation. And the panel we are going to explore today is on lifelong learning. So lifelong learning is not a new concept as such. It has been around for, I think, in the pedagogical notion since at least middle of 20th century, but practically it has been there forever. So adults do learn throughout lifetime, and life is never-ending learning journey. So in that sense, we cannot say that anything new is happening when we start talking about lifelong learning. But again, because of challenges that we have right now, the need to redefine how we organize lifelong learning, how we practically handle it, is absolutely imminent. And maybe the crucial part is that in previous, let's say, centuries, the kind of change that we're experiencing right now, for instance, the transition from agricultural society to industrial society, it could be facilitated and supported through educational systems, and it was relatively smooth. We could say that, okay, the new generation learns new ways, adapts to the transition, while the older generations phase out. Right now, everyone, from babies to senior people, undergoes through this need for adaptation to an AI-rich society, and perhaps ahead of us, the general artificial intelligence, which can radically redefine the rules of the game. And also, educational systems themselves are actively challenged by AI coming in. So the question I hold for our panel is, I know it's not only AI, so we do not have to focus on the AI. We are in the poly crisis, we are in the systemic transition, we have many factors playing in, we have sustainability challenges and environmental crisis. So it's many more aspects of the crisis that we are facing. But let's look at this systemically, and let's say that the current situation around AI is a kind of wake-up call to us as people who work with education. What is the new shape of things to come, so to say, in the space of lifelong learning? How do we see this pathway forward that we need to open up? And I think we can start with presentations, but I would like to invite you to keep some time, maybe to have your contributions of 7-8 minutes, so that we have some time for interaction between us on this panel. Olivia, maybe we will start with you. You mentioned this is not the key subject of your study, but you look at education very systemically, and from that lens, where do you think the transformation to our approaches need to happen?
Okay, Well, I was here secretly hoping you would pick me last, but it's okay that you pick me first because either way, I'm going to sort of really launch a provocation, if you allow me, rather than give a speech, because truly I feel a much more a learner than anything else in this field at the moment. So I allow me to just share a reflection that is almost a micro story of some of the work that we've all been engaged with over decades now. And I really liked the description you gave of the session. I think it sets the tone of the conversation. And I wanted to bring us to a slightly different route into this conversation, which is that I feel for decades we have worried and then critiqued thoroughly the fact that the economy, and in particular GDP, have been by and large misrepresented as an end rather than a means. And I would argue that in the last 10 to 20 years, this position that was never warranted of economy and GDP as an end has become itself the means to technology, which would neatly bring us to indeed your the sort of presentation of this session and the purpose of this session. So with this premise then, I feel that when you say that, you say the recent invasion of AI into mainstream work environment across almost all industries has both accelerated and radically altered worker requirements, eliminating many existing jobs and demanding acquisition of higher order skills in current or new forms of employment. Now, what this makes me feel, and it's not the text, because what you are reflecting on is what is absolutely abundantly being discussed now out there. But what it makes me feel as one of the million little, elements of the academic endeavor is very much like being in a matrix where you are just permanently responding to external crises. Let's use, what is it, meta crisis or, poly crisis, the latest framing. And yes, okay, not just crises, but opportunities. There's abundant language around the opportunities of AI and every possible evolution of that technological world. But the point is that we are responding to either the crises or the opportunities that were not necessarily meant, I would say, for living a good life. And I mean this in the Socrates' own conception of it, which entails a certain level of examined life. It's not just about having a life. And behind all the opportunities that are being, I would like to say, thrown at us, I feel that what is being offered ultimately is to have just a life. Now, academia is largely part of the system and its logic, with extraordinary exceptions, of course, and notably Arizona's university is a shining star in this realm. But by and large, we are part of the system and of the logic. And at best, we are attempting to wag the dog by the tail in a direction that would be meaningful. But we're not doing more than that. So what if we asked, what would it mean to offer lifelong learning and knowledge for a good life as intended? Can we even ask this question? Or are we just to respond to the opportunities that AI will offer us and how we can negotiate them? Can we then ask the simple question of what matters most before we answer the question, what can we know? And then what must we do? Which is an echo to another of our great thinkers, Kant, and whose third question, which academia systematically in general ignores, which is, what may we hope? What may we hope? And I would like to ask that question first before I answer the question, what can we know? What kind of knowledge for lifelong learning should we offer? And then what must we do with it? So it's basically, I would like to invite that if we want anything to significantly change of the endless list of crises that we are compelled to introduce in every session, and change a direction that is desired as opposed to imposed, even if that imposition is framed as an opportunity, then I think we need to learn or relearn to ask the question, what may we hope for and what matters? So that's my contribution.
Thank you, Olivia. And appreciating this, I would like to say that I would like to also really frame this as part of our further discussion. So that will be my invitation to the next upcoming panelists. Because in my framing, I ask to what extent life learning is a space of adaptation, and to what extent it can be a space of creation, co-creation of the future we want to see. The discovery of possibilities, the discovery of society we co-create, and learning for that. So maybe with that spirit and holding the provocation of Olivia as part of our further conversation, I would like to invite Antonio to speak. Antonio, you are a practical man in a way in this panel because you are running a university, so you have to deal with challenges of how to frame it in curriculum and at the same time reform your university for these future challenges. So how do you see this set of questions we are posing in this panel?
Thank you very much. I'm talking from Brazil. We have Getúlio Vargas Foundation, where I work, has doctoral programs, master's programs, but we have a very large continuous education program with 50,000 students, maybe half face-to-face, half online. What can see is that a huge demand for rescaling and upscaling all professionals that look for our education. So there's a large demand, especially because all repetitive jobs are being displaced by the technology. So many people, bankers, for instance, everything is to be more and more online. And the person that was 10 years, 20 years working in a bank, they lose their jobs for AI. And this is a big thing. They need to rescaling, upscaling to find another job. No? I have some finds. One finds that if everybody use AI, everybody is in equal level. So the difference, what can aggregate to a company is creative thinking, solve complex problems, emotional intelligence. So given everybody is AI, they are equal. So now what the difference is the human capabilities. So we need to explore their human capabilities, that this will be quite important, very important to all of us. If given that we have some training on technology and AI as a technology, human plus AI is a quite powerful situation. Huh? The workforce is better, is more smart, more agile, and deeply innovative. Human capability plus technology. This is is a big difference. We can free time, the technology can free time for strategic and high-level planning. But most importantly, I envision that long range, we have so many technologies in all places that people will have less than 40 hours of work per week. They eventually have 20 hours and they will take care of themselves, their family, they can study, they can reskilling continuously. Because if you use a lot of technology, people will have free time to better themselves and their families, the human behavior. And another point that I made some notes. One thing that scares me is the bias. The AI systems can be unintentionally reflect the prejudice of training. Who is training the AI? If they are trained with bias, this bias will affect all of us. All of us in hiring a company, many companies receive thousands or thousands CVs. And if they use AI to screening, you have a big bias on that in hiring people for work, for law enforcement. Given that you have some physical characters, AI, if it's biased, it will be quite complicated. And this another point that I think is unequal access to AI in many countries, a big country, let's say United States. If you have the poor don't have the full access of technology, and the rich that 1% holds about 40% of the wealth, this gap will increase in the US, in Brazil, in the more less rich countries will suffer more. In Brazil, for instance, if the poor people don't have access to technology, and I have access to technology, the gap will be enormous. It's a problem. It's a challenge for even national security, because people, this will be quite strong. 10 families holding almost all the country. Huh? And I just to stop at this point, lifelong learning is a civic duty. It's an obligation of government to invest in lifelong learning, because people will be without jobs. And there will be a social mess if you don't really invest in lifelong learning. Because if you don't do that, the gap will increase between poor and rich. And this will be a social problem for any country. So I don't want to spend more time. I'm trying to follow the rules established by Pavel. Thank you very much. And I think it's very interesting, this discussion.
Thank you very much, Antonio. And I really appreciate this idea of lifelong learning as a civic duty, which sort of addresses one of questions which I posed to us preliminary when we were kind of looking forward to this panel, the idea of whose responsibility is lifelong learning, which probably is not anyone's individual responsibility, it's everyone's responsibility collectively. but to
Yes.
frame it also as a civic duty, I think that's an important important framing that we should bear.
Just to complete this, in Brazil, we have not lots. All states have public schools, at least 2, 3, 5, depending on state, public schools. The public schools in Brazil, they are free. So they could promote these civic duties, at least in the public schools, okay? And will make a huge difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to actually now maybe transit to Dr. Moneef, because I believe that many of things that Antonio just expressed, you will also perhaps, that's my assumption, knowing some of context of Arabic world, they probably would also be highly relevant for countries that you work with and the context that you work with, and especially the issues of AI bias and how it sort of is heavily relying on Western perspective of the world and does not really fully appreciate other perspectives. An inequality gap, which also it creates, especially for parts of population that may experience themselves kind of on the other side of the fence, so to say.
Okay.
So what's your perspective? Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Pavel. I will be looking at the question that you have kindly raised from a public policy perspective. And yes, from a person who's, although lived and worked in the North for many, many years, is essentially concerned with the South perspective or the perspective from the South. I would say that AI today is diagnosing diseases faster than doctors, drafting content faster than writers, and optimizing systems more efficiently than teams of analysts. The implications for productivity are very well known. They are vast, and also the challenges to the way we think, the way we educate our children, and the way we view socioeconomic development. Our institutions, however, particularly in the South, especially our educational institutions and national science, technology, and innovation ecosystems, that's the part of the governance structure that I work with and focus on in many countries, seems to be lagging behind when it comes to adapting or adopting policies for AI. We are witnessing an exponential leap in technology that is met with a linear and sometimes stagnant response from the very systems responsible for preparing our societies for the future. This gap is not only an administrative concern, but it's a threat to economic competitiveness, social equity, and national resilience. Our current education model throughout the world, in the North and the South, still prepares young people for a world that is quickly disappearing. It front-loads learning into the first 20 years of life, thus negating UNESCO and the other previous speakers' philosophy of lifelong learning. It does assume that people have career stability and focuses heavily on content acquisition, the accumulation of knowledge, but not necessarily the capacity to utilize this accumulated knowledge for socioeconomic development. AI needs to be, again, looked at in terms of its capacity to influence critical thinking, ethical judgment, emotional intelligence, and the ability to communicate, collaborate, and adapt. Our education system must now walk a tightrope. One side, it must equip learners with practical AI skills. We all have to do that. How to use such tools, prompt systems, interpret AI-generated results, and understand the implications. And then we have to utilize or learn the tools to humanize the output of the AI ecosystem, because that's a different component of the AI information production procedure. We have to try and see how AI helps or hinders our capacity to ask meaningful questions or assess information or engage in persuasive and emphatic communication. This dual mandate is not optional, it is essential, because without it, we risk raising generations who are technically proficient but intellectually passive. It's like when the calculator came along, most of our accumulated capacity to do simple calculations by hand or mind gradually faded away because we rely so heavily on our calculators. In some parts of the world where calligraphy is important, Chinese characters, Japanese characters, Middle Eastern characters, that's an art form that's fastly disappearing because nobody is using his or her capacity to produce art in that form. So regulation is necessary to ensure that we maintain both the AI capacity to utilize the tools, yet not lose our inherited capacity to use our skills that we've acquired over centuries. I think that is important. It's important not to over-regulate AI in many countries because although we need the legal tools, but there are already in existence are legal clauses in all our laws that regulate the flow and confidentiality of information and so on and so forth. So the challenge is to apply them smartly and proportionately, these regulations, so that we ensure that our AI ecosystem is dynamic. I will sum up, Mr. Chairman, with two quick recommendations. Yes, educational systems are lifelong and should be lifelong, but they should be flexible and dual focused, in my opinion, on AI fluency and human excellence. We should try for as long as possible retain our human excellence. Secondly, I would say that our STI ecosystem, science, technology, and innovation, that are, or we think are future-proof, dynamic, and should be embedded in our national priorities, need to be reviewed as quickly as possible in the light of all the developments that have been taking place. One look at the Global Innovation Index with its 70 different indicators would bring all this back into focus. In fact, I would go as far as to propose that countries that do not have a policy or a vision for the dissemination of AI into their national education system to adopt the Global Innovation Index as a possible tool to really be able to govern or improve the governance of their STI ecosystems. So I think the classic recommendation also would be that we need governments, that's for you, Mila, educators, that's for you, Mila, as well, and all the others, innovators and civil society to work together to make this tremendously important shift, because the AI age is not a distant horizon. It is already here, and whether we see it as a threat or an opportunity will depend entirely on how we choose to prepare ourselves for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moneef. Yeah, I think a great segue to our last speaker, Mila Popovic. And Mila, I think you don't require many introductions, and I think everyone in this room and perhaps the listeners will know your work. But I believe a lot of what Moneef just expressed, you are also facing as in your government role, like talking about what kind of policies need to be established, especially since Montenegro is not maybe the biggest resource endowed country, but is an exemplar country facing this kind of challenges in many other places in the world. So what is your perspective of the transition we need to accomplish?
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of the friends today, and happy 65th to the World Academy. I'm sure that the entire noosphere is reverberating with what we are sharing today. And it seems to me, based on what we have shared so far, and your questions, Pavel, so well framed, it seems that we're asking about the guiding system for sense making in this era. And what seems to me that we have all kind of shared in our way and agreed that, if you will agree, because I would love this to be a collective intelligence presentation, collective intelligence sharing, it seems that we need, for that guiding systems for sense making and what is pressing us today, we definitely need a higher perspective, a big enough narrative that will include universal human rights and responsibilities, I keep insisting, and universal humanistic values, that which we know is based on universal human needs and aspirations, that which we know is indeed universal to every human being, and by extension to every life form. We need deeper knowing of ourselves, our relationships to each other in the world. We need finer sensing, because in the world of overstimulation, we have entered an anesthetic world. I keep repeating and insisting that the opposite from aesthetic is not what people imagine is what's beautiful and ugly. No, the opposite of aesthetic is anesthetic, where we are jaded by too much info, or we are actually exhausted by lack of food and essential human needs of which we spoke earlier. So in either case, you are not able to feel, and in that sense, without the feeling receptors and antenna, we're not able to orient ourselves towards what is life affirming and what is life destructive. So we need, in that sense, finer sensing and developing all senses, physical, mental, intuitive, psychological, if you will. And we also need broadest impact. And within that category, you referred to the work that I'm doing here. Knowing me as you know me, I have different identities and a spectrum of identities. That is my way of living in the world, and in essence demonstrating that that's the only way to survive if you expand your own capacities and role play. So the broadest impact would also mean, with me choosing to take on a role in the government in order to do what Moneef and what you just directed to, saying, how do you connect, build the trust bridge again between state and society and different segments of society, educational systems, health systems, and all. So within the aspect of broadest impact, what I'm trying to do, and it's what I've learned from others, is to teach people and I don't mean just children and young, but politicians, hopefully, decision makers, and all, speaking of lifelong learning, to be social artists, to remember their capacities, to express their capacities, to remember that with their creativity, innovation, even with their own testifying to their own reality and their lives, they bring forth very important truths without which there is no cumulative truth that puts us back to the top of the higher perspective that can generate a larger narrative of universal understanding of where we need to head as civilizations, I should say, as global citizens and as planetary beings. So it seems to me that we would agree that for what we need today, in order to achieve higher results, we need to apply higher principles. And it's the values and the ethics of which you've all spoken about, and I insist on 3 codes together for programming, for cultural programming, technical program, any science programming, that it has to be conscious of and involve ethical, aesthetic, and ecological codes together. So with this, I would like to, point out, I don't know about, maybe I have another minute, but what I would like to say here, it seems to me that the question we are asking here today is how we can achieve long-term qualitative change for exponential development. Because we have produced tools that are outrunning us, which means that in order to run it and run our world, what we will need to do is to basically we need to have qualitatively finer properties and higher values to respond to the challenges of today, to recognize its paradoxical opportunities and discover the evolutionary potential of technology, and to enact the change at the higher level of order, which is always going to be inclusive, humanistic values, of which the leading is the empathy. So in terms of lifelong learning, it is, as you know, Pavel, an initiatory learning that I always talk about that needs to tend to all the phases and faces of humanity. And that for human rights to be exercised, for values to be recognized, distilled, and coded, for empathy, for any of that, for learning, health, wisdom, wealth, and well-being, we need each other. So Moneef, in that sense, you have just demonstrated that we have just co-created something, and nothing was taken from me. I've learned it in a chain of humanity. So the final thought in this first round would be that the development of whole human being is what we need, but the development of whole human being with consciousness of its interbeing, of its vital interconnectedness and interdependence with all life forms, all phenomena, all beings, conscious of co-becoming, meaning bound identity. This is key because of the identity wars and conflicts in the world. That there is no identity if it's not in a relationship to something or somebody else. And we also need the development of the human being conscious of interbeing, the co-becoming, and of course, the human being that creates the sense of in-belonging. Inclusivity is vital for the survival and development of our species and the next stage of global civilization for planetary beings. It is exactly that AI is showing us that if we are not conscious that we are being harvested, our collective intelligence is fed into processors, and we are being literally human resources that are fed into the processors. In some ways, AI is the fulfillment of the humanity's dream of unity. And we have to guide it in a very conscious way so that it really becomes the medium for it as an empathetic tool that shows us that all of our knowledge, identity, sense of belonging needs to be based on the solidarity deriving from technology and its evolutionary potential.
Thank you, Mila. And thank you, everyone, for this first round, where I think all of you are pointing to this highest potential or highest possibility of what emerges. It's deeply inspirational, I think, what we are discussing here, but I'm also worrying, kind of reflecting back on the question that Olivia, on one hand, posed before us, and Mila, I think you kind of partially or like quite comprehensively at the same time, quite comprehensively answered what we can hope for. We can hope for that transition to a unified humanity manifesting humanistic values with ecological, aesthetic, and ethical codes. But also I'm struggling, and I guess a lot of people within this conference and outside of it are struggling with the question that we have also the gap that Moneef talked about, the gap between systems that are advancing this forward. Like there is another gap. Maybe you were talking about one type of gap, the slowness of systems responding to the transformation. But another gap is also that these systems are also deaf to the kinds of words that are expressed in spaces like ours. They frequently do not embrace humanistic values. They do not embrace ethical and aesthetic and ecological codes, including people who are behind the development of AI systems. I mean, they have goodwill for sure. Most of these teams have very positive intentions towards humanity. There is no, like say probably no conspiracy theories, and quite the opposite. But they also, the good point about not having ecological values in the system, that's very true. So we only have about 5-7 minutes for this second round, but so I would like to invite you for a brief contribution. What can be one inflection point, one leverage point, where we can start closing this gap between, let's say, good-willing humans and humans that hold this higher hope for the society, and people who are currently making decisions, including people who are designing technologies. And maybe if you also mention what can be the role of World Academy as one of the players in which bridges many of these agents, can we also use this opportunity as a WAAS to step into this conversation and to advance more positive agendas. So let's go in the same order. So Olivia, I would invite you first to share your brief thoughts. Let's keep it to 1-2 minutes.
Well, I really love the way that the conversation has weaved around, and Mila summarized it beautifully for us in terms of the opportunities out there. I think I don't have a direct answer to your question, Pavel, in truth, because all I see from my department, my institute, is the incredible challenges that this technology is posing for the bare minimum quality of scientific pursuit. And there are now increasing articles explaining how the quality of science is actually slowing down or reversing. So we are awash with something that is not worth printing paper on. So this is a big problem. So for me, my answer is a plea to all academic endeavors to return to base in terms of what values, and they may be the ones that Mila has listed, but what values need to move every single choice and discussion that we have from now on. Because if they are the ones we have, as I said, illustratively using Kantian's questions, we are not addressing the most important. And by that, we become simply part of the matrix, whatever you want to call it. It's this image of being moved by rather than moving. And the difference to me is substantive. And I see it in class. I see it in how students inevitably. There was a beautiful illustration by an AI expert, and I'm sorry I don't remember his name, but he gave this illustration. He said, would you give a Ferrari to a kid? No, you wouldn't, because it is too powerful, a machine. But you are happy to give them a telephone, a mobile phone. And from then on, you know, as I witness when I go to the supermarket, I see kids saying, Siri, what is 47 plus 47? So for me, then all I can say is, can WAAS help refocus minds around what really matters so that then everything else can follow?
Thank you. Antonio?
Well, I have 2 points. One is about the regulation, equity in AI governance. We need to, this debate is pressing. Second one is repeating that lifelong learning is a civic duty, is a social justice, and even a tool for peace. We need to stop a little bit from talking, discussing, planning, and just do it. If you don't do it, nothing will happen. Someone needs to move from talking, intellectual talking, and just move to do it. And I'm trying to do it. That's why I have 50,000 students, and we may accept more. Okay. Thank you very much. It was a great opportunity to know all of you, and I learned from different perspectives about the same problem. Thank you very much. For me, it was a pleasure and honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. Moneef?
Yesterday, I talked about divides between cultures, between civilizations, between continents. I think at the global level, there is a divide that is rapidly rising between politics and policies, between values that we take the moral high ground on, such as rule of law, good governance, multilateralism, and in the domain of education, critical thinking, ethical judgment, emotional intelligence, and communication capacity. There is a rise between this ecosystem, which takes the moral high ground, and the rapid pace of technological advancement. It's critical that organizations such as WAAS, and thought leaders such as yourselves and others ensure that whilst we take the advances provided by AI on board, embrace them gracefully, and move forward, that we ensure that our education system does not lose track of values that we have accumulated as human beings over millennia, that are relevant today, will be relevant today, and far into the future, particularly in the hearts and minds of our politicians who are causing havoc all over the world and making life difficult for everybody else who's not in politics.
Thank you, especially for this great last point. Mila?
I'm more where Olivia is, even with being very grounded in everything that I'm doing and saying. I am concerned. I do know, and I start from what I've reminded myself and at the panel yesterday, that all governance, all technology, all education, all health industry are human. Humans work there. How to rehumanize some humans, how to humanize technology. It is going to take addressing the profound existential exhaustion of every human being right now, because we're still stewing in the same soup, whether you're in a castle or a tent. We're feeling, regardless. Look at Elon Musk. This is the first time I'm mentioning a name of somebody. He's suffering. He's a suffering human being. So we have to appeal to the profoundly existentially exhausted humanity of every single political leader and approach them that way. We have to find energy within ourselves to run for offices, accept difficult political spots. Trust me, this is not an envious space that I'm in at all, but it's a noble fight. So we have to mobilize 1.8 billion youth as a force, knowing that there's a formula. There's a formula that is scientific research has shown that if you manage to, in any society, engage around peaceful ideas, 3.5% of population, you'll shift the planet, you'll shift the society. Let's think about those numbers. Let's think about what India can do. I'm being very specific. So knowing that, and if you want to mobilize the youth, trust me, with what I'm doing here and seeing, they'll drop their phones when you ask them to recite their own poetry, do their own dance, create their own content, express their being. Because again, it's all human, and we have to bring those human stories forth. And we have to remember in the World Academy of Art and Science that it was disillusioned scientists, but enheartened human beings that created it. So both World Academy, because I keep thinking about its next steps, and World University Consortium need to be that advisory, highly values-based organization that is the neutral, disinterested advisory body at every level, at every register, to tell its story first of how it survived the Cold War as a testimony, and then inspire people to choose the right path at this crossroads, because we need each other. And the quality of life is not going to be anything if it's not with each other.
Well, thank you everyone for this conversation. And I think we all carry this message forward in our coming days. How can we embrace our human side in this transition? How can we hold these higher grounds and be the connecting force, the weaving force, in a way, weaving the world back together? Thank you very much.